Out of the many mysteries in the Naruto world, one of the most intriguing and compelling ones is why on earth is the Rain Village so freaking high-tech? I mean, I can't be the only person who's wondered about this, right? Because the Rain Village is not a major player in the Naruto verse. They are a small village slash small nation that's sandwiched in between the main great nations of the world, and their country has been a major bloody battlefield for the entire duration of the Shinobi Age. During every single ninja war, the Rain Village has been a major battlefield with the exception of the 4th Great Ninja War, but still, they never really had a very powerful military. Yes, they had some talented shinobi, but nothing compared to what the Leaf Village, or the Sand Village, or the Mist Village had. If anything, because of this massive amount of destruction that's been caused in the Land of Rain, the Rain Village should be less developed than the other places, right? Because it just makes sense. If a country is stormed by war pretty much non-stop for half a century, it's fair to assume that the country will be less developed in every single regard than the countries that are not torn by war. Because this was the great unfairness of the major ninja wars. Yes, the 5 great nations fought those wars against each other, but they didn't fight the wars in their own lands, they fought them in the smaller countries that border them, so it's very unfair. I mean, sure, their ninjas die, but their land is not destroyed, their crops are not burned, and these smaller nations suffer for nothing just because they exist in between those larger nations. This is the reason why the Akatsuki was formed and why Nagato became a radical, wanting to distribute pain around the entire world by collecting the tail beasts and giving out weapons of mass destruction so that the 5 major nations could essentially destroy each other and understand pain so that peace will be achieved. But having said all that, it doesn't look like the Rain Village is doing too badly, does it? They're pretty much living in Cyberpunk 2077. If you look at the Rain Village, they have massive skyscrapers made out of those cool metal pipes and metal structures. There are several of those skyscrapers, and their architecture is unlike anything else that we see in the Naruto series. And obviously, the higher a building is, the more difficult it is to build it. This is very apparent throughout real-world history. The more developed societies became, the taller they managed to build, until in the 20th century, skyscrapers essentially exploded and became something quote-unquote normal in our society. I mean, nobody really takes a look at a 10-story building nowadays and says, oh man, that's so impressive. But in the Naruto world, 10-story buildings, for example, are not the norm. They are the exception. And those buildings in the Rain Village are way, way taller than that. If you take a look at the 5 major great villages, for example, it seems like they have a building code that doesn't allow them to build higher than 5 to 6 stories. Their buildings are pretty squat overall, and it's not very impressive. I mean, the villages are large, but the buildings, they're pretty tame. And that goes for the Sand, the Stone, the Cloud, the Leaf, and the Mist villages combined. None of them have very tall buildings, which is just a massive contrast to what the Rain Village looks like. In a funny way, if you calculate things out and assume a lot of those tall buildings in the Rain Village have apartments and people live in them, the Rain Village has capacity for way more inhabitants than any of the 5 major villages. Because the taller you build, the more people you're able to put in your city in a smaller amount of space. And the Rain Village, you know, when you get those wide shots, those 2-page spreads, or when you see the city from far away, it's actually pretty damn large. I would argue it doesn't lose to any of the 5 major villages in terms of sheer size of the city itself, and when you factor in all those massive buildings, the Rain Village is probably the most populated city in the entire Naruto world. Also, we see that when Jiraiya infiltrates the city, there are different levels beneath the buildings themselves, which makes the city even bigger, and this is a very cyberpunk concept, as I mentioned before. Cities with levels, very technological, lots of metal, lots of neon signs. It's clear that Kishimoto took inspiration from a more cyberpunk aesthetic when he made the Rain Village, which really fits the aesthetic of the Paths of Pain with those black piercings and a very different and punk aesthetic from anything else in the Narutoverse. Nothing really looks like the Paths of Pain, especially with the Rinnegan, which is a very quirky eye that we'd never seen before. So the entire vibe of the Rain Village is different from the Naruto verse. That's not to say that there are no modern-ish buildings in the Naruto world. We see a couple of them even in the Naruto series, not in Boruto. For example, when Deidara explodes himself with C0 and it's zoomed out, we see several cities that are actually dwarfed by the size of the explosion, but we see that those cities have some modern-looking buildings that don't look like those traditional Japanese buildings or the buildings we would find in the 5 major villages. They look much more modern. Also, when Sasuke goes after the cat lady to get supplies in his mission to go and hunt down Itachi, the cat lady is located in a city that's pretty much abandoned, but you see some modern-ish buildings there. It's interesting that those buildings may be much more modern than the usual buildings we see in the Narutoverse, but the city has nobody in it, and they're pretty much ruins. So that's kind of weird, isn't it? Why would people abandon those buildings? What's the lore behind that city? Very interesting things to ponder. And yet, the 5 major villages, which are supposed to be the major places in the verse, don't really have buildings like that, and people are abandoning those buildings elsewhere. Also, when we see that brief image of the destroyed Usuhiko lands, or the land of Eddies, or the land of the Uzumaki clan, we see some ruins that look like pretty damn modern buildings, which is also interesting because the Uzumaki clan was extinct around the time when the villages were founded, so about 50 to 60 years before the start of the series. And the 5 nations, I mean, it's as though those buildings don't even exist in the verse. Or it's as though there's an airport right next to every single major village and they can't build too high for safety reasons. And it's funny because those buildings that I mentioned, they are located in the land of fire, but the Leaf Village itself doesn't seem to like them. I guess they want to keep that more traditional aesthetic for their ninja village, but that's the only real reason I can think about. But those buildings, they don't even come close to what the Rain Village looks like. They do have some different type of tech, or metal, or whatever they use to build buildings like that. First, because they're much taller than any of the other buildings we see in the Narutoverse, and second, because they look absolutely different as well. Now, I mentioned the aesthetic designs of the buildings, how they are influenced by cyberpunk, and how much they fit with Pain and his aesthetic. I mean, Pain's tower with that mask and that tongue is really iconic. Pain really likes to sit on that tongue and observe the Rain Village in the tallest tower in the city so he can control everything. And the cyberpunk aesthetic looks amazing. It gives this different vibe to the city that's unlike anything else in the verse. So yeah, the most simple explanation as to why the Rain Village looks like that and is more technological is because, well, it looks cool. That's the main reason, but that's no fun. So in universe, how would this war-torn nation be able to build so much better than anybody else in the world, and where would they even get the resources to do so? Well, if we analyze the flashbacks of Nagato, Yahiko, Konan, and Jiraiya in all points in the story, we never see buildings like that in the Land of Rain. During the flashbacks, as a matter of fact, it seems like the Land of Rain really looks like a war-torn nation with not a lot of resources as one would expect. And yes, we don't specifically go to the Rain Village proper in the flashbacks, but we don't see any signs of cyberpunk behavior in the architecture anywhere. Which leads me to believe that these new buildings and the new aesthetic of the Rain Village is something kinda new. And this would make sense because the new leader of the Leaf Village, Nagato, with his Paths of Pain, is also kind of new. We don't know exactly how long ago Nagato became the leader of the Land of Rain, but it was after Obito became quote-unquote Madara Uchiha. Because when Obito first meets Nagato, Nagato and his proto-Akatsuki were still hiding in caves and Hanzo was looking for them, so obviously he wasn't the leader yet. And Obito met Nagato for the first time about 13 years before Naruto Part 1 started. So we can probably assume that Pain/Nagato has been the leader of the Rain Village for about 10 years, which means he would have that amount of time to develop the Rain Village into that cyberpunk aesthetic, building all those structures and levels in the city. If you factor in the Naruto Shippuden time skip, he would have a little bit more time. After all, we just see the Rain Village in Naruto Shippuden. And you may say this is not enough enough time for something like that, but actually, no. We see that cities in the real world can, get some major development in pretty short amounts of time. Also, the Land of Rain became a very closed-off nation after Pain became its leader. Yes, they aligned themselves with the Leaf Village. We see some Rain Ninjas in the Chunin exam, so obviously they had some treaties. But Jiraiya himself mentions to Tsunade that they pretty much know nothing about them. So it would make sense how they would erect a cyberpunk city in the middle of the world without people really knowing about it. They were so closed off that Jiraiya had to infiltrate the city to try and find the leader of the Akatsuki. But the problem is just people that would work on those construction projects. Because, yes, you can build cities very quickly, but you need a lot of people working. And yeah, I mentioned that theoretically the Rain Village could house way more people than any other village in the world, but the Land of Rain is a much smaller country than the 5 great nations, and I doubt they had as many people to work, especially people that had, these abilities to build massive iron constructions. But you know what really reminds me of those buildings in the Rain Village? The Asura Path. The Asura Path is certainly the most technological thing we see in the Naruto series. I mean, it's technically created by chakra and not technology, but it looks like an android. So maybe Nagato used that as inspiration to build his village and gave his scientists, engineers, and architects some material to study and develop their craft so that they could plan those buildings out. Or maybe the Rinnegan even built the buildings themselves. Maybe he used the Asura Path in combination with another path to build them. But I kinda doubt that Nagato would be able to build those buildings by himself. The Rinnegan doesn't really have abilities like that, especially in Nagato's hands because he wasn't an original Awakener. Maybe if you were arguing about Hagoromo, who had a Rinnegan ability called the Creation of All Things, then it would be feasible, but not for Nagato, I would say. Still, when Jiraiya infiltrates the city, we know that the population is very happy with the leader, which is Pain. They call him a god, and they don't have anything bad to say about him. They really think he is a terrific leader. So it's very obvious that their lives have improved over his reign. I mean, yes, he put an end to that cycle of wars that ravaged the Land of Rain, which is a very good thing in their eyes because they don't have to die in random wars anymore. But the last war had happened over 15 years ago when Jiraiya infiltrates the city. So in that amount of time, yes, sure, you ended the war, but if you're not a good leader and you don't do good things for the population over that period of time, people will grow discontent, even if you ended a war 15 years ago. So the overall quality of life must have improved in this period of time, which probably means that yes, Cyberpunk Rain Village was probably erected after Pain became their leader, which becomes even more obvious when you factor in that Pain Tower, which is the place where Pain stores the Pain bodies and controls everything, is the same aesthetic as the rest of the village, and Pain wouldn't have that tower in the village before he became the leader because he wasn't the leader, he was a criminal in the eyes of the Rain Village state. So he built that after he became the leader. It just has the exact same aesthetic as the other buildings in the village. And those buildings probably allowed several of the people who were displaced during the war that lived in the fields or far away from major cities in the Land of Rain to go to the city and live good lives there. Because as I mentioned before, a lot of people can live in places with high buildings. So when you put all these facts together, it's likely that Nagato used the Asura Path as an inspiration to make those massive buildings, allowing his engineers to come up with very different designs simply because the Rinnegan is so unique and he was the only person in the world who had that available to him, meaning that this is the reason why the Rain Village looks so different. And then all those people that were displaced during the major wars that happened in the Land of Rain came to the Rain Village so that they could build those buildings together. And then they could live in those buildings. It would make sense for people who lost everything in the war and didn't have a job anymore to come to the city to build the structures that they would one day live in under the leadership of Pain, who's going to oversee the project, help here and there. Obviously, Konan can also help. She can probably lift things with her paper jutsu. And now because there's no more war and people have places to live, they have places to work, they are very happy with Pain's leadership, and so they really think he is a god. Also, the fact that he is extremely powerful. In the Jiraiya versus Pain fight, we see the interior of several of those buildings. After all, the fight kind of happens inside of those Rain Village buildings, but, well, those couldn't be all the types of buildings there were in the city, because certainly people lived in those buildings as well. It's just that they looked very empty from the inside. A very good place for a fight between Jiraiya and Pain, but not a terribly good place for a city to house people in. You don't really get a sense of what those buildings are for, the buildings Jiraiya and Pain fight in. They're just empty space with some pipes here and there, but what are those pipes even for? Like, there's no need for a bazillion massive pipes coming out of buildings everywhere in your city. You don't really see that in the greatest cities in the world, where millions of people live. Obviously, there are massive pipes underground, but unless a dinosaur is dumping his waste in a building in the Rain Village, there's no need for pipes of that size in the buildings themselves. But you know, sometimes you just have to surrender to the rule of cool, man. It just looks pretty damn great. Everything about the Rain Village is unique, and it's very good to have a different battlefield to make things a little different. Think about this for a second. 80% of fights in the Naruto series happen in a forest or an open field. The rest of battles happen in urban areas, and urban areas tend to be pretty samey. But when you have a cyberpunk village, that makes things way more exciting. And it's a good thing that such an iconic fight happened in this really different place. After all, that was pretty much the only big fight Jiraiya ever had in the series. So it's a good thing that there was a good fight and it happened in such a cool location. And yes, it's very much implied that after Nagato and Konan's death, the village would be pretty much without leadership and they would struggle a lot. So Naruto actually promised Nagato, before Nagato sacrificed himself to bring back the entire Leaf Village, that he would take care of the Rain Village in Nagato's absence when he became the Hokage. Which certainly didn't happen if you consider Boruto to be a canon story, but obviously it isn't canon, so no, Naruto certainly took care of the Rain Village after he became the Hokage, and it's actually a very prosperous place right now. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already, like this video if you enjoyed it. Seriously, it takes 2 seconds and it really helps me with the algorithm. And watch this other cool Naruto video here as well. Thank you so much for watching, guys.